Well, hello, and welcome to BreakOpen Life. Simply put, it's about freedom. Your freedom. From the inside out. From a cellular level to how you live your life. It starts with empowering you to understand that you can become the master of your own health. Your physical health, your mental health, your financial health. And then it takes it outward. How can you have healthy relationships? How can you have healthy community? How can you live in a healthy society? I don't know about you, but there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world right now. And much of it seems to be designed around perpetuating and promoting and actually creating fear and confusion in people. Why? Well, it's not as complicated as you might think. People who are afraid and confused are easy to control. People who are afraid and confused are easy to manipulate. People who are afraid and confused tend to forget that they and they alone are in control of their own life experience 100% of the time. We don't get to control anything that happens to us, but the moment that we sense it, the moment that we perceive that something is happening, we have absolute control over how we respond to it. Interestingly enough, there's a process. There's a process by which we can practice and perfect the ability to respond in a way that allows us to preserve the type of experience that we want to have. Can we prevent fear? No. So let's learn how to make it our friend. Yep, you heard me. Make fear our friend. I happen to have a slightly different point of view from most people about fear. I truly believe that it is one of the most vilified, judged, and misunderstood emotions that we have. And I've come to this conclusion because of the fact that over the last 5+ decades, various experiences and adversities have shaped, molded, and shifted my relationship to fear in the most profound and tremendous ways. My name is Rhoda Sears, and this podcast is going to be a series of real and raw conversations with me about how to break open life from the inside out. Why from the inside out? Think of an egg. If an egg has forces exerted upon it from the outside, it gets crushed. Life ends. But if allowed to develop and breaks open from the inside out, life emerges, triumphant, curious, ready to learn. So let's get started, shall we? Well, hello and great morning, my friends. I am so excited. It is Monday, February 12th, 2024, and this is the first full episode of my new podcast, BreakOpen Life. A new episode will be released every single Monday for 52 weeks straight. That's right. For 52 weeks, I am going to come to you with real and raw conversations from my heart to yours. I'm going to share about how I broke open to life and why you might want to too. And if you do, I'm going to give you some suggestions, some pro tips, some, shall we say, possibly even admonitions from the lessons I've learned along the way about what not to do. And trust me, there's probably way more of that than there is of success at this point. And I say that with a little bit of tongue in cheek, for I do believe that there is much to be garnered from this podcast. Oh, one more little piece of 411 for you. The vast majority of these episodes are going to be kind of me speaking from the heart. And what I mean by that is I might have a cue card or two. I might have a small outline just to give me some framework and make sure that I don't forget key points and ramble on endlessly as I've been known to do. But for the most part, everything I'm going to say is going to be, shall we say, divinely inspired in the moment. I'm going to use this podcast as an experiment, a trust in my faith that I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I need to be doing, for the right reasons at the right time, in the right place, for the right people. Which means if I really sit and reflect and pray upon it in the mornings, and I know that I want to be of service to whomever decides to take their precious time and grace me with their presence on my podcast, then whatever it is that I say and the stories that I share that day and the lessons and whatever little mini heroisms or wisdoms I can come up with, they're going to be just the right message for that person, whatever it was that they needed to hear, as if it were custom designed for them. I really, truly, fundamentally believe that. Now, with that said, I'm going to read to you from the description that I painstakingly wrote with you in mind. My whole life, I have never felt like I really fit in or truly belonged anywhere. Little did I realize that this deep-seated loneliness was simply my personal power in dormancy. No different from how seeds remain alive for long periods of time until germination, so too was I, alive and ever waiting. I am that late bloomer, that seed in a state of suspended animation wherein its metabolic activity slows way down, enabling it to withstand virtually any unfavorable environmental condition, such as extreme temperatures, wind, ice, drought, and lack of oxygen. I often felt as if I too were stuck in a state of arrested development, watching everyone around me find their stride and seem to have a sense of direction in the race of life long before I ever figured out where the starting line was. With every passing letdown, disappointment, and misfit timing, my outer layer became super tough and resilient, and just like with a seed, it protected the embryo, my inner essence, from all the external forces that tried to mold and manage me, as I lay waiting for what I believed was my time coming. For any of you, all of you, who feel like I did, this podcast is for you. Let's be clear, though. I don't have any answers for you. Only stories, lessons, strategies, and perspectives. I'm not an expert at anything, except at being myself. I don't have a long list of letters indicating fancy credentials of any kind after my name, and yet I've come to know my self-worth. I'm not world famous, and I haven't made $1 million in a single year. Yet. But those who meet me usually know I am genuine, and whether I am their cup of tea or not, I do believe I am remembered. I proudly proclaim that the greatest outward achievement I've made to date is in the role of motherhood to 2 amazing young men, whom I will make much mention of in my stories. Together, they have woven the most beautiful and equally the most painful parts of my story, and in so doing have allowed me to come full circle into what I believe is the germination period of my life. Up until now, I've lived a life most often on behalf of others' needs ahead of my own. It's taken this long to get to truly know myself, love myself, and trust myself. Along the way, I've had the most incredible and turbulent relationship with this thing called fear. This son of a gun often shows up in my life flanked on either side by trusted sidekicks named anger and depression. Together, this tumultuous trio have at different times and in different ways each been my captor, my nemesis, my taunter, my bully, my guardian, my maker, and my best friend. They have been with me ever since I can remember, and they comprise and define the longest and most consistent top 3 relationships in my entire life. My journey navigating the different phases and stages of my personal relationship with scared, mad, and sad will be the underlying structure of the stories I will share with you. I have had many mentors of many sorts over the years, experiences, people, books, television, movies, observations, Mother Nature, marriage, my children, and not the least of them for mentioning last, God. It is my intention and sincere wish that you will come to know the meaning and the value of both hope and hopelessness in your life through these stories and the lessons they taught me. All I can do is offer you examples of what worked and what didn't work for me, and in so doing offer you the gift of time. It has taken me 56 years to find my voice and summon the courage to share it in this way. I genuinely believe there is wisdom to be had in the 52 conversations to come. Now, if you know me at all, you know that what I'm about to say is of absolutely no surprise. But if you're new to my world, then I think it's important for you to just be aware of a couple of things. I don't watch my P's and Q's all the time the way that I should. I don't always speak with the most beautiful, eloquent language. Although my vocabulary is pretty extensive, I can find myself in the gutter with the best of them at times, and for any moment where I might digress in that direction, I'll do my best to edit, and occasionally I won't, and you're just going to have to give me grace. Well, you don't have to, but I'm going to ask for it. The other thing that is really important for me, for you to know, is it is not important to me, and I am in no way, shape, or form attached to whether or not you agree with me, whether or not you find something I say good, bad, right, or wrong. And for the purposes of listening to any of my podcasts, I would invite you to practice a couple of things. Eliminate those words, those 4 words in particular, from your vocabulary. I'll probably come up with a few more along the way. Words like problem. I usually prefer to use the word challenge. And I have found that, after I learned, when we get into the part of our podcast where I talk a lot about neuro-linguistic programming and how important language and words are, you'll learn why that is. Another thing that I think is really important for you to know is I believe in God. I believe very strongly in my faith. Now, I won't say that it's always been the most perfect relationship throughout my lifetime. In fact, I would say it hasn't been. I have definitely had my qualms with whether or not God exists, and whether or not He cares about me, and whether or not He's paying attention at all. And I think you'll find, as we move forward, that my faith has never been stronger than it is today. And this is evidenced by the myriad of things that I have gone through. And shall we say, not just survived, but found a way to thrive through. I have found evidence in my life that nothing, and I do mean nothing, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful, no matter how horrible, and also equally, no matter how wonderful, none of it happened to me. It all happened for me. One more thing I want you to know. There was a time not long ago in January of 2019 when I was invited, as part of the work that I do as a coach, to a leadership conference. It was a very small and exclusive event of about 250 people. And the main speaker was an author and someone who I have so much incredible high esteem for, a man by the name of Jim Dethmer. He is the author of a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. We're going to talk a lot about this book. It is a fundamental cornerstone of everything I believe in and how I choose to show up in the world. So Jim was the keynote speaker that weekend. And I can honestly say that in all of my most recent 15 years of coaching, and in all of the keynote speakers I've had the great privilege of hearing on an annual basis, several times a year at various events, Jim was one of the most impactful of all. Him and another one, a photographer from Life magazine named DeWitt Jones. I'll talk about him too. So when Jim got up on stage, one of the things that he said really, really struck me, and it is something that I have taken to heart, made my own, and is definitely part of how I show up in the world. It's why I wrote some of the things that I wrote that I just read to you. Jim said, and I quote, "Don't believe a word I say, because nothing I have to say is original to me. Everything is my interpretation, and it's some form of regurgitation of something that has happened already before me, some aspect of which has already been said or invented before me, and of which I may take parts and improve upon them, or parts and just reiterate them, and parts and summarize." And instantly, I felt I had rapport with Jim. I felt I had this sense of relief. Oh, thank God. He is not going to try to sell me something. He's not going to try to convince me of anything. Heck, he's not even claiming to know anything. So while on one hand, one might sit there and say, well, what in the world am I sitting here for? Why did I come all this way to hear someone who says he has nothing new to say or teach me? And, I found myself laughing and just saying, wow. And instantly, I just fell in love in all the right ways. I just relaxed and settled into my chair, grabbed my water bottle, my fueling, and just listened. And I wasn't trying to judge him, and I wasn't trying to come up with ways to make him wrong or ways to make him right and decide whether I agreed with him or liked him or disliked him. I just listened. And I thought that was one of the most brilliant things I'd ever heard a speaker say. So it's something that I adopt. And I move forward, and it's how I start most of my coaching relationships. I let the people that I work with know I don't know everything. In fact, I know very little. And it brings me to one of the most pivotal lessons that I have learned in the last 16 years of my life in coaching. And that is that there are three main areas of life that we tend to live from. One of them is that I know that I know. What does that mean? Well, it's all the things you're really certain of. All the things you absolutely know to perfection. I know it. You can't tell me anything new about it. You can't teach me anything else about it. I know every aspect of it. In fact, I know more than you. Sound familiar? Most of us live from that place. It starts at about the age of 2. Seriously. Think about it. And it has like a whole life of its own in teendom, in teenagerhood. And wow. It is the area that we think is the vastest. It's where we feel the most confident and competent. And it's a lot of times where we open mouth and insert both feet and swallow, if you know what I mean. Then there's the next area of life, and that is the I know that I don't know. Well, there's another way to put that, and we'll talk about that when we get to some of the educational pieces that I've really taken to heart and learned so much from. But for now, let's just say that I know that I don't know is the realm of the universe that says, I'm aware that something exists. I know that it's a thing. I know something about it. Maybe I have some inkling or some notion, but I also am aware that I am not an expert at it. I don't know everything there is to know. There's probably a lot more that I don't know. And I get to decide if it's of interest to me or if it's of any consequence, whether I ever pursue any more knowledge in that area or not. Kind of like I know that there is this language called Czechoslovakian, but I don't know that I ever will feel inclined to ever want to speak it fluently, right? I know that I don't know. Now that area of life, by the way, I don't have specific statistics, of course, but let's just say it's significantly larger. If you think about the sum total of things that you know, and then the sum total of things that you know exist in the world that you only know just a little itty bitty bit about, it'll give you some idea. What do you suppose the largest area of life is that most of us operate from and have no clue that that's actually where we're operating from? Care to take a guess? So did you guess in your head? All right, time's up. It's otherwise known as your blind spot. It's the largest area of life that we have no idea that we're operating from, and it's called I don't know that I don't know. Another great word, clueless. Clueless. No clue. It's not even on your radar. You didn't even know that was a thing. You didn't know it existed. You didn't know it was important. You didn't know why you would want to know it existed. It's kind of like the vid was prior to December of 2019. None of us had heard of it. And now look at the significance that it's become in our lives. Well, a lot of things in life may or may not ever become important to us, but it's the things that we don't know that are in play and literally operating right in our blind spot, about to completely mess us up, just like cars in our blind spot, if we don't double check and we go to maneuver to the right or to the left of our lane without checking. It could be catastrophic, right? Or it could certainly be just very, very frustrating. That's how these things operate in life as well. It is exactly the same. This area of life that operates in our blind spot is the thing that we need to be the most curious about. Well, let me ask you something. Think about this for a second. How do you know that which you don't know? Isn't that a quandary? Well, here's the secret. You don't have to know the things. You just have to be aware and accepting that there are many things that you don't know that you don't know. So whenever you come across something in life, and there's an upset or a pause or a disagreement or an argument or you just feel so strongly about, either for or against, right or wrong. You just want to make someone else wrong so you can be right. One of the first things I've learned to do is start to ask myself, what don't I know that I don't know here? What is possibly at play, either with myself, the situation, or with this other person, that I have no clue exists? Get curious about that, ask questions, find out, and then proceed to seek a solution. It's a game changer, y'all. It is a total game changer. So we've come to the place where I want to talk a little bit about the big B word that has played a huge role in my entire life. I probably could go so far as to say that it's plagued my entire life, but I'm going to try not to be quite so dramatic. Belonging. Whether or not I felt like I belonged. Well, before I can really address that particular piece, I want to talk a little bit about this moment in life, and we've all had it. I mean, literally, every single person, this is one universal experience throughout all of humanhood, is that at some point in your earliest childhood, you might not even have a distinct memory about it. But at some point, you're going to have figured out or gotten the sensation within your body, something that went straight viscerally through your entire body up until your brain, where you figured out, something is not right here. Something is wrong. Something is very, very off. It doesn't feel normal. And the moment that you had that experience, you started to feel separate from whatever the it was, whether that was your family, your mom, your dad, your siblings. It could even have been as late as your preschool or elementary school, kindergarten, something like that. But somewhere, everything was going along just fine, and then it wasn't. You got yelled at. You got in trouble. You got your hand smacked. You got your bum smacked. And I don't mean beat. I mean like a swat. Back in my day, that was a thing. And the moment that the face that was looking at you went from smiles to stern, went from happy to serious, went from pleased to see you to annoyed or angry with you, you perceived it. Trust me, you did. I don't care if you were 2 months old, 3 months old, hopefully not that young, but unfortunately in some people's lives, it happens. But the moment that that relationship to your primary caregiver or the person that you were most bonded and connected to was severed because you displeased them, made them angry, or disappointed them in some way, trust me when I tell you, it occurred to you, something ain't right. And from that moment on, you ceased to belong inside of that relationship, in that specific environment. And from that moment on, you have to, whenever you're around that person or in that situation, feel as if you've got to be more than who you are in order to fit in, belong, stay, be accepted, be wanted, be liked, or even be loved. Now, why is that so significant? Well, because it sets the tone for everything else in life. It literally becomes the internal scripting and that inner voice and message that says, you just ain't good enough. You are not enough. You just simply being and showing up and being your little cute self is not enough here anymore. Maybe you were at one time, but you ain't anymore. And when that feeling, that sense of, I now have to do something. I now have to be someone different and more than who I am in order to earn my spot to exist in this place and with this person. It really plays a huge role in messing you up. And how often you're made to feel that way, and I'm framing it that way very intentionally, because as a child, we don't have the ability to be on our own. We know that instinctively. We do something called cleaving. We know that our survival depends upon the grown-up that is in that environment. And for most of us, obviously, that's our parents. Some of them are going to be blood. Some of them are going to be adoptive. But either way, it's going to be your very first initial primary caregivers. And I will say this, it didn't occur to me until I was an adult and I was a parent. And it just so happened I was an adult before I became a parent. And obviously that's not the case so much today. And in many, many cases, it's not the case, right? But it wasn't until I was adult and I became a parent that I realized the responsibility and the heaviness that it takes to be a parent and to raise a child, to be responsible for an entire living human being, an entire life, that if you don't do exactly the right things, will cease to exist. That's a pretty hefty thing. It's way more than the responsibility that you had as a pet owner when you were a little kid. I mean, how many of you were like me, where as a little kid you owned fish and rabbits and birds and turtles and, other hamsters and guinea pigs, small little animals that, well, let's just say because maybe you left the cage door open or you forgot to change out the water or feed them as much as they needed to be fed or something, and that poor little critter met its demise. How many of you came home from school and found your fish floating belly up at the top of the tank and you weren't really sure why? And what happened? Well, if you were in my household, depending on the particular circumstances of that animal no longer being with us, we either replaced it or we replaced it with a different kind of animal that was either easier to take care of or larger and more substantive so it wouldn't be forgotten. And I had everything from, lizards and mice to to little fish and you name it, I've had it. And I think the lesson that I learned at that particular time was you had to be big enough and important enough to be remembered, but you also had to be easy and simple to take care of, not too complicated, or else you either didn't make it or you got replaced. And, as a child, you don't make the distinction between others and yourself. Everything that you learn and observe, you kind of adopt and you somehow make it your story and you make it applicable to you. That's just how a child's brain is wired. And I remember thinking, well, my goodness, I have to be extra good. I have to be extra perfect and extra easy so that I don't get left behind or replaced. Now, my parents never made me feel that way. They were very loving, very attentive, and for all intents and purposes, I was pretty spoiled as a kid growing up. But that's not how I felt. That's not what I saw. In fact, I remember thinking of all the things I didn't have. Now, I mentioned that I grew up in a lot of different places. I did. My parents were at the State Department. We lived in 11 different countries growing up. And so I was moving every 2.5 to 3.5 years. 4 years in a couple of different places. Now, my father was the primary, and his specialty was all third world relations. So we lived in mostly third world countries. What the significance was of that upbringing, I would not come to realize until well into adulthood. But it exposed me to different languages, traditions, backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities, race, religion, clothing, customs. Everything was different every 2.5 to 4 years. And I mean everything. I had to learn how to observe, how to respect, how to fit in, how to participate, how to contribute in each of those environments. And of course, I was doing it at the level of a child, which basically means I didn't have any skills or prior experience to draw from. So it was literally flying by the seat of my pants at any given time in any given space. So what does that look like? Well, on the one hand, I gained tremendous social skills. I learned how to be the new person that nobody knew, and I had to learn how to communicate, how to ask questions, how to decide whether or not, how much information I was going to give about myself in a particular environment. And it became more important for me every time I was the newest one in the room. It was more important for me to be quiet and to listen and to learn about what was important to people, what was the right way and the acceptable way to do things in that particular environment. How was I going to be a contribution? How was I going to fit in? And how was I going to stand out? Those things became things that I was keenly aware of, and I would have to figure out very, very quickly because I didn't have a lot of time. It's not like I had a lifetime to get to know somebody or just take for granted that we were going to get through several grades and then end up in high school and college together. No, I knew that every time I moved to a new country, I had, the clock was ticking. I had a certain amount of time to create friendships, create community, create a sense of belonging. And then I also knew that there was going to come a time when I would have to say goodbye. And back then, you guys, there was no internet. There was only writing on a piece of paper, put a stamp in an envelope, and send it off and wait for days, weeks on end before you would hear something. And, I know I was pretty kind of extraordinary as a child because my parents would encourage me to write letters, which is why I was really prompted to get very good at reading and writing because it was the only way I could keep in touch with people that I cared deeply about that I didn't get to see anymore and would never know if I was ever going to see again. So, it's funny because as I sit here trying to talk to you, my thoughts are just racing through my head, and I wish you guys could just climb in here and observe like a movie what's going on in my mind. And I'm having to pick and choose the things to share and find the ones that are going to make sense for you and give you impact and something valuable to walk away from. And I guess it's this. I want you to think of all the times you were new in a particular environment, something that was strange and unfamiliar and uncertain. Because this is a condition that we live in a lot in our lifetime, especially in adulthood. Things are going to be unfamiliar. Circumstances are going to be uncertain. Sometimes it's not going to be predictable. And you're going to have to figure out whether that's a new job, a new family, a new marriage, a new relationship, a new friendship. You're going to have to figure out how to adapt. And I started doing that at a very young age. And like I said, I learned some really, really great skills. On the other hand, I never had roots. I never had a sense of long-term belonging. There was no place I could ever go back to that was called home. So for me, home was always where I was at, in the moment, right here, right now, in this country. And that was the other thing, this idea of, buying a new house. We never owned our home growing up. What was that? I didn't even know you could do that. For us, it was whenever we got to a particular country, there would be a certain number of houses that were leased by the embassy that would be available and open because those job positions were being filled and in transition. Sometimes there was only one or two homes to choose from, and sometimes there were a lot to choose from. But I remember being dragged around with my parents to go to the different houses, and luckily they gave me a say. Which one do you like? Which one would you like to pick as your house? And I would do the same thing because we used to have something called the GSO, the General Services Organization. And so we had a core bunch of tchotchkes, lamps, rugs, what you would call accessories in a room, things that we would accumulate in the various countries, things that would, my mother would buy chests and rugs and artwork and clocks and statues and pieces of artwork and things that were native to a particular country. And that would be part of our belongings. And I have a home filled with most beautiful things from all over the world right now because of those travels. But what that meant was the staples. I want you to really try and grasp this, because there is a point, and I promise I'll get to it, that the staples, the table, the bed, the dining room table, the couch, the end tables, and in some cases the lamps, and even the artwork, none of that was permanent in my world. None of it. Except the things that we bought and took country to country to country. The majority of the time we would get to a particular country, and yes, our household would get packed up, our kitchen items and all the things. But there were staples within that household that I knew that did not belong to me. They were just the bed I slept in. That was just the couch we had at the time. And this was just the office furniture or the den or whatever in that country. And we would go to the General Services Organization, the GSO, and we would pick out our furniture when we arrived at a new country. So we'd pick out the house we were going to choose to live in, and we would pick out the furniture, and the embassy people would bring it to the house, and my mother would be little Miss Martha Stewart and decorate everything. But I knew that none of that was permanent. So I never had attachments to material things like that. What mattered was the painting I invested in, or the little statue I bought, or the scarf, or the rug that was on the floor. So the things that were permanent for me, that I took from place to place to place and that made things home, were things that were portable and transportable. And what made it home were the people that I was around. In other words, my mom and my dad and my pets. So I say all that to say this and get back to the whole pet thing. There were times in my world when, because of the distance we were traveling to the new country, and because of the quarantine laws, and because of maybe the stops along the way that we would be making, it would be impossible for us to even take our pets. For me to take my pet. And so I remember two in particular where I had to leave them behind. So I had to learn to form quick attachments, quick associations, meaningful ones, but I also had to learn how to perform quick detachments. I had to learn how to let go, and I had to learn how to adjust missing and being sad and having something. As a child, it felt like it was being taken away from me. But I had to learn that not everything is permanent. Not everything can go with you. So make the most of a particular environment, make the most of a particular country, make the most of the friends in this classroom, this grade, this time in my life, because it was going to end and I was going to have to adjust to something new very shortly. Now, I want you to think about that. I want you to think in your lifetime growing up, how often you've had to let go and how often you've had to adjust and become the new person in that environment, and then have to make it feel like home and make it feel fulfilling and comfortable and fun, and build up that community around yourself, knowing that it was going to end soon, knowing that there was going to be an end date. How often have you experienced that? Do you do that with your jobs? Do you realize that the job that you're in or the job that you took is just the first step, right? It's just the stepping stone onto something greater. Well, I learned that pretty quickly in my whole life, that the friendships that I was developing were the stepping stone and the skills to the next friendships that I would be developing. And I learned, very quickly what works in friendships and what doesn't work. What works to make friends and what doesn't work. How do you keep friends? What did I have to do in order for that person to write to me after I left? and in order for them not to be gone and lost to me forever. And I think that's the one thing then why I love Facebook so much. Now, I have a love-hate relationship because I hate Facebook for a lot of reasons as well. But one of the things I adore Facebook for is that I've been able to reconnect with people from all over the world that I have had the great privilege of crossing paths with. I get to reconnect with them. I get to learn about what life has been like for them since we last shared a particular country together and school experience. And it's been an extraordinary journey. And many of you possibly listening to this now are part of that community for me. And, maybe we have connected already and we've gotten caught up, or maybe we have yet to. So don't be surprised, because trust me when I tell you, I have been very deliberate. I've made a list of people who have been key relationships in my life, and you will be hearing from me if you haven't already. And we're going to catch up. We're going to fill in the blanks. Because for me, and I hope you hear my heart here, that's like coming home. It's the only time I get to revisit something that meant something to me in my childhood. Ooh, I didn't know that was going to impact me this way. But, that's how sentimental my friendships are. Because I had to make them and break them quickly in succession of each other. And many of them I've never had the opportunity to revisit until now in adulthood. And it's how I spend the majority of my free time, my free social time, is looking to reconnect, catch up, find out, learn from. I want to know, because we used to share our dreams and our hopes and our thoughts and our fears as children. And I want to know how your life turned out. How's it going? What's going on with you right now? That is the way in which I get to figure out the juxtaposition of my relationship to the world I live in, is through the relationships that I had at various time periods in my life. That's how I pinpoint certain, those are the mile markers of my life. You people, the friendships I've had in the various countries that I've lived in, you are the mile markers by which I keep track of my life. Oh, that's when I was friends with Cookie. That's when I knew Tracy and Sally. That's when I knew Lisa and Kelly. That's when I knew Allison and Philip. I mean, it's funny, it's ironic, it's wonderful, it's all of those things. It's just this delicious recipe of life that is filled with moments of belongingness and then strangeness. And life is like that. And what I would encourage you to think about, investigate, explore, ask yourself, really take a deep dive in your life, is think about all the times that you felt that you belonged, and think about all the moments that you felt you didn't, and then ask yourself what contribution you gave to those environments. Now, if you were a little kid and you didn't have the skills, that's obviously a little bit different. But what I'm saying is, if you're an adult and you're listening to this now, which I'm assuming most of you who are listening are going to be adults, obviously, what is it that you're doing or not doing that allows you to feel like you are a part of something? Whether that's work, your family, your church, your hobbies, your sports teams, whatever that is for you, whatever the community is where you feel like there's just not enough or you're not enough in that environment, I just invite you to stop and think about it. Like look at it from a wider point of view. What have you done? What are you learning? How well do you know and understand the different players in that environment? And what do you bring to the table? How do you stand out? And how do you fit in? And what have you done to be a contribution there? Those are things that I've learned to think about, because that's what lends itself to community. And whenever I have found that I didn't feel a part of something, it's because I didn't pay attention enough. I didn't learn enough about what was important to the other players. And or I wasn't finding my voice in that space. I wasn't figuring out what talent or skill I could bring to that environment, how I could make a difference in that environment for someone else. But when all of the heads in a particular place are doing that, when we're all trying to figure out how to appreciate, how to delineate, how to engage with the other people in that environment and provide value and experience, so that with the knowledge that down the road, in days to come, weeks, months, years, you would have the possibility of reconnecting and talking about the good old days. And talking like these days that you're living right now, this moment, in all these different environments, the memories you are creating, the experiences that you are having, the engagements that you are involving yourself in, the actions that you are taking or not taking are literally shaping your future regrets and your future blessings, the things that you are going to be grateful for. So when you're mindful about that, when you're mindful about not wanting to regret a missed opportunity to have a conversation, a missed opportunity for that hug or that special kiss or whatever that is, that's what's going to make the difference. And when you start making the effort to be engaged, the effort to create the memory, that's what's going to create that sense of belonging for you. So if you're sitting back and you're acting like others aren't doing enough, or that it's just not, you just don't relate to the people that are around you, you got to take a look at what your contribution is, and you've got to decide if that environment really isn't for you, then find the one that is. Then take yourself out of it and find something that you're passionate about. Find people that are like-minded to you. Find experiences that you're looking to have, and find the people who are having those, and then go figure out how to participate and be a contribution in that environment. That is what is going to make you feel like you belong. And it wasn't until I got a chance very recently in my life to look back and realize that, what has felt like to me this journey of constantly not belonging has actually been a lifetime of belonging to hundreds of different environments and spaces. And it was through no fault of my own that just the way my parents, what their profession was that had me bouncing from place to place to place. This idea that I had in my head as a child that I didn't belong anywhere and I never got to stay and I could never, don't close your eyes because you're going to open them and everything's around you is going to disappear. Like sometimes I had that feeling. It wasn't like that. That's just the story I told myself, because as a child, that was the capacity of my understanding. Belongingness is a sense of self. Belongingness is a sense of contribution. Belongingness is a sense of engagement. So if you don't have a sense of self, you're not finding ways to be a contribution, and you're not making the effort to be engaged, that's why you have a sense of not belonging. I'm going to leave it there, but I invite you to, I've asked a question, and I've also posted a poll along with this episode, and I'd really like you to participate with that. This could be your first step, unpacking what belonging and fitting in means to you and what standing out means to you, and how you have orchestrated that intentionally or unintentionally in your life. And what, if anything, you're going to do to create it for yourself moving forward. So there you have it. Have a great week, you guys. Take care. God bless. I certainly hope that you found something of value here today. And please, don't forget to do something that scares you today. Bye.